Yes, all right. And welcome to our guest. He is, of course, as we said, a very reliable person on economics, on history, on the philosophy of freedom, and on this topic tonight, of course. He's Jacob Hornberger. I salute you, sir, from Vulcan. How are you, Jacob?
Oh, great. Nice to be back here, Gardner. Always an honor and a pleasure to be with you. And inspiring.
Yeah, this is great. This is great. I'm so pleased to see you. I see you're relaxing in the summer temperatures there. You're in Virginia, right?
I am.
All right.
I love hot weather. If it goes over 100, I'm a happy man.
Well, I know you of course, growing up in Texas, you had some pretty hot weather there. I wonder did you ever see any snow when you were a kid in Texas, or was that not happening?
I think it snowed one time the entire time I was living in Laredo. It was a real fluke.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, I'd love to talk to you sometime about getting into the legal profession. And as you and I have discussed, representing people on the immigration side of things, a lot of work on that. And there's so much to discuss there. But you've done a lot of work on the JFK assassination and the research. And I want to show people, even though it's going to make me look like I'm on fire here when this screen comes up, but I want to show people on the screen what I included in the news notes for reference. As I said, Jacob Hornberger, founder and president of the Future Freedom Foundation at FFF.org, will dig into part 3 of our series on the JFK assassination, this time the Zapruder film and the federal government hijacking and editing, reworking of it between the 22nd and 24th of 1963. So we've got a couple pieces there. Of course, many people have probably read these over and over again. I have. The Evil Within and the CIA's Zapruder film Secrecy. And those are just 2 that I posted for, the people come to my Substack. You have an entire book on this, and people can find this at Amazon. Why don't you lay it out for people about why it's important to realize that what has been in front of their eyes on television wasn't actually what was filmed?
Yeah, well, last week we talked about the fraudulent autopsy in the Kennedy assassination, which is the convicting factor that on the military as to how we know that with the military, it goes from conspiracy theory over into conspiracy as a fact, because the autopsy was fraudulent. You have a fraudulent autopsy conducted by the military. There's no innocent explanation for that. It's necessarily part of the cover-up. That's how we know beyond any reasonable doubt that the military was involved with the assassination of the president. You'll recall that one of the things that we pointed out was the treating physicians at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, the nurses, the Secret Service agent Clint Hill, there was a newsman named Roy Stamps. They all said that Kennedy had a big blowout wound in the back of his head, which implies a frontal shot. There was also people at Bethesda, where the autopsy was held at a military facility there, Bethesda Naval Medical Center, that saw this hole. And then there was Saundra Spencer, the Navy petty officer, who developed one set of autopsy photographs. And when she was shown the official set, she says, no, that's not the set I developed. The set I developed showed a massive 2 to 2.5 inch diameter hole in the back of the head.
Yeah.
So if you accept all that, which I do, very credible evidence, overwhelming evidence, then that means that the autopsy photographs have to be fraudulent, because the autopsy photographs show the back of the head to be intact.
Yeah.
Which means no frontal shot. It's
absolutely
shot from the rear.
Right.
Okay, so that's a logical conclusion versus that all these doctors and FBI agents and people just made this up. Maybe like in a conspiracy or something.
Yeah.
But there's a problem, because if you look at the frame following the gunshot in the Zapruder film, it shows the back of Kennedy's head to be intact. Okay, so how's that possible? If the photographs are authentic, which is what the official narrative is, then they're saying, well, this is proven that they're authentic, that all these witnesses just made this up. Well, so the assassination critics always knew that the film had to have been altered, assuming that you believe all these treating physicians and nurses and so forth. They knew that the the photograph had to be fraudulent or was fraudulent, but that had to mean that the film is fraudulent too. But they couldn't prove it. They had no proof at all. Now what's the Zapruder film? Well, Abraham Zapruder was a Dallas businessman. He had a women's dress business. He would go to high class places like Neiman Marcus and study what they were selling, and then go back to his office and draw knockoff dresses that looked just like it, but at a much cheaper price.
Talented man.
Yeah. And he had come from New York. He had immigrated from Russia, very poor. But in Dallas, he made it big. His business was going really, really well. He was, at the time of the assassination, he was living in the most prosperous, wealthiest part of Dallas, which is Highland Park. So he was also an amateur filmmaker, home movie guy, that he had a top of the notch Bell and Howell movie camera, very expensive.
8mm.
8mm.
Yep. My dad had one of those with one of those German lenses, the great German lenses. They were beautiful. Yeah. Well,
he had been taking movie videos or films of his kids, for years and years. This guy wasn't a professional, but he was as close to a professional that an amateur could be. So on the day of the assassination, he goes out to Dealey Plaza, decides to film President Kennedy in the last part of the motorcade. All the crowds had thinned out there in this part of the parade route. And he films the assassination. He's filming the assassination, and shots ring out and people are hitting the ground. They know they're shots. Not him. He keeps the camera right running and doesn't flinch. So he ends up capturing the assassination until the car starts moving forward to go to Parkland Hospital. So he captures the whole thing on film. And he immediately knows he's got something important and valuable. He goes back to his office, he locks it in a vault, and immediately the Dallas police show up, who were out confiscating people's cameras and film and stuff, saying, we need this as evidence. And they ordered him to turn it over. And he said, I'm not going to do it. And it's locked in that vault there. So they couldn't get in it. And so suddenly an FBI agent shows up named Sorrells, and he trusts the FBI. And so he says to Sorrells, well, let's go get it developed, make some copies, and I'll give you a copy. Sorrells says, fine. So they go to a television station there in Dallas. He does an interview, which is really interesting to watch on television, but they tell him, we can't develop your film here. You got to go to Kodak. And Kodak practically had a monopoly on the film business. They controlled about 75% of the film business. And so they sent him to Kodak. He goes there and they said, well, we can develop your film, but we can't make a copy here. For that, you need to go to Jameson Film Company. That's another part of Dallas. And to do that, you need to keep the film in 16mm format. Now it was called 8.8 film, but it was meaning it's 16mm wide, not 8mm wide. And you put this thing into the camera, and it would film with a little gate that would limit it to 8mm. Yeah. Then you take it out when you finish and you put it back in, it would film right on the other side of the strip vertically.
Yep. We used to do that with my dad's camera. Yep.
Okay. Then you take it to Kodak and they would develop and then slit it down the middle vertically.
Yeah.
And then they would connect the two ends. So instead of a 25-foot long strip, you'd have a 50-foot long strip and 8mm wide instead of 16. But they told Zapruder, if you want copies, you have to take it in 16mm format to Jameson and then bring it back here, and then we'll finish it up and we'll slit it down the middle. And so that's what he did. He had 3 copies made at Jameson, comes back, they slit it down the middle, and they watch both the original and the copies. And the guys there at Kodak said you could clearly tell the difference between the original and this first generation copies. They said they're just, you could see it just was fuzzy, the copies, a little fuzzy compared to the original, which was stark and crystal clear and so forth. So Zapruder takes the original and 3 copies. He gives 2 copies to Sorrells, and he keeps the original plus a copy for himself. He goes home. He gets a phone call that night from a representative from Life magazine, which was the premier magazine in '63. I mean, millions of subscribers, the most popular magazine probably in the world at that time, but certainly in the United States. And Zapruder just loved Life. Everybody loved Life magazine back there. It's kind of a pictorial magazine. Big. Yeah. And so this guy, Dick Stoley, says, I hear you got this film. We're interested in purchasing the print rights to it. If we like it, can we talk? And Zapruder says, meet me at my office tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. So they meet there, and Stoley looks at the film, and he makes an offer to Zapruder. And Zapruder was a smart businessman. Zapruder didn't like the offer, but he didn't counter. He just changed the subject and started conversing with the guy. So in the middle of the conversation, the guy ups the offer, like, I'll offer you $30,000. And Zapruder doesn't counter. He doesn't acknowledge. He just makes idle conversation. And the guy keeps bidding against himself until he gets to $50,000. And Zapruder says, you got a deal.
And now, this was on the Saturday the 23rd or the week? Saturday the 23rd.
Yeah, the assassination takes place on the 22nd. Yeah. This is Saturday morning. Assassination happens on Friday afternoon.
Wow, boy.
Now, $50,000 is a lot of money. It equates to somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000 today.
Wow.
So they strike the deal for the print rights only, because obviously Life magazine is interested in print rights, and they didn't have the means of showing the film as a motion picture like television or a newsreel at the theater.
Yeah.
So they struck the deal, but Zapruder had to wait a week before he could promote the film as a motion picture, so they could get their value in Life magazine.
Oh, right.
So he gives the original film to Stoley, and he retains the copy. And he agrees that after a week, Life will return the original, and he will give them a copy. So on Sunday night, suddenly everything changes. It's a whole different ballgame. Stoley contacts Zapruder and says, we've changed our mind. We want everything. We want the print rights. We want the motion picture rights. We want all the copies and the original. And Zapruder says, well, meet me in my office Monday morning. So Zapruder has a bidding contest. The media's going crazy now over the film. Dan Rather is there, ready to bid for CBS.
Wow.
But Zapruder was leaning toward Life. He loved Life. He respected it. He admired, and he wanted his film to be treated with great respect. And he loved the Kennedys, too. He idolized the Kennedys. He knew that Life magazine would treat his film with respect and treat it well. So Life made him an offer he can't refuse. $150,000.
Wow.
$100,000 on top of the 50.
Wow.
And that equates out to be about $1.5 million. And so they strike a deal where he's going to get paid $25,000 a year, which is kind of odd because Life magazine's a big company. They could afford to pay the whole thing right up front, but that's what they wanted, and he agreed to it. So he gives the original and his copy to Dick Stoley on Monday morning, and he never sees his film again until many years later. Now, the official narrative has always been that on Saturday morning, when Life magazine took the original film, that it went to Chicago, where Life magazine's printing plant was located. And they were already going to press on the November 29th issue. They would come out on a Friday, dated Friday. And so the 29th was already set up. They had a whole article on Lyndon Johnson's corruption, official corruption. I mean, if that article had come out, he would have been indicted. There's virtually no question about that.
I was going to say, how ironic.
Yeah. Well, it may not be that ironic. It may be not a coincidence.
Yeah, that's
because they eliminate that article in order to put in what are muddy black and white copies of the frames. This is a crystal clear color film, and they're promoting it with these muddied black and white copies of the frames that you really have trouble deciphering.
Yeah.
So for years and years, the assassination critics knew something was wrong here, but they couldn't figure it out. There was no evidence. They knew it had to be altered, but the only people who could alter it were people from Hollywood. They could do it in Hollywood, but there was never any evidence as each decade went by that the film went to Hollywood or that Hollywood people came to Chicago. So the defenders of the official narrative could just laugh whenever they said, well, we think the film's altered. Oh, conspiracy theory, which it was because there was no evidence that it had been altered. So it was very powerful evidence in favor of the the official narrative of the lone nut assassin. Well, in 2009 or thereabouts, there was an assassination. Now, what's that? From 63 to 2009, 40, 50 years? 45 years?
Yeah.
Okay, that's how long they were able to preserve this secret. They're very good at
46 years.
Okay.
Unbelievable.
That's how long this secret lasts. They're very good at preserving secrets, the national security state.
Yeah.
There's an assassination researcher named Peter Janney who is researching a new book called Mary's Mosaic that he wrote. It was a murder case on the C&O Canal Trail in Washington. A very prominent woman who had been having an affair with John Kennedy in the latter part of his life. And by all accounts, he had fallen in love with this woman. And he had known her a long time. And she had been married to a high official in the CIA. They'd gotten divorced. And Janney suspected, whose father was in the CIA and who had known this woman when he was a kid, grew up in the same neighborhood in Georgetown, suspected that this is not a standard murder case like they were saying. They'd arrested a poor black guy and were blaming him for the crime. And he was saying, I didn't do this.
Yeah.
And so he got acquitted. And Janney was researching this with the idea that this was a national security state hit, CIA, military, whatever. Mm-hmm. And in researching, he comes across a former retired CIA official named Dino Brugioni. And now, Brugioni, you can Google him, you can ChatGPT him, you'll see that he is one of the most prominent, respectable, admired figures within the CIA in CIA history.
And this guy is Brugioni, right?
Right. Dino Brugioni. He was the world's most premier and accomplished photo analyst and renowned within the CIA and really renowned all over the world in terms of expertise in photo analysis. He was in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, analyzing the photographs showing the Soviet missiles in Cuba. He later wrote a book called Eyeball to Eyeball. He was second in command at the National Photographic Interpretation Center in Washington, and NITPIC as it's called. He helped found it. I mean, this guy was the top of this game of photo analysis. Janney calls him up and says, my dad was, I forget what his dad's first name, Janney, and Brugioni was about 80 years old at this point. And he says, oh, I knew your dad well. He's a great guy, and why don't you come on over and we'll talk? And Peter says, fine. So he goes over there. They're having dinner or something. It's casual conversation, and Janney's trying to see what he knows in terms of his book he's writing. And the Zapruder film comes up. And Brugioni says, oh, yeah, I know about the Zapruder film. I had contact with it. And now Janney's ears just perk up like, wow, nobody knew this. And Brugioni really should not have been disclosing it. This was a classified operation he is now disclosing. And it's still a mystery as to why he decided to do it. But my own hunch is that he had figured out there was some nefarious stuff. And by all accounts, this guy is a very honorable guy. But he's retired at this point. He figured probably also they're not about to indict him. But he tells Janney that on Friday night of the assassination, he was summoned by his boss, Arthur Lundell, to NPIC, National Photographic Interpretation Center, where he worked, with a team. And when they get there, 2 Secret Service agents come in with the Zapruder film. Or it wasn't known as the Zapruder film then, but come in with the Zapruder film. And the purpose is to make briefing boards for displaying to people within the CIA, like the CIA director. And Brugioni was called the briefing board czar because he was so good at doing these briefing boards. He had his own special way of doing it. He'd do 2 great big boards and put a hinge in the middle so that they could close up real nicely and then open up. And what they would do is select out frames. He would copy the frames, blow them up, and put them on the briefing boards.
Yeah.
So he said that they saw the film over and over again. Oh, and one of the funny parts is that they did not have an 8mm home camera at the CIA Photographic Center. They always dealt with 16mm film.
Right.
So they didn't have a little home movie camera there. And so they had to find a guy in the middle of the night that owned a store that could sell them or give them the 8mm home camera.
Wow.
So they bring it over. They watch it multiple times, like 15 or 20 times. And Brugioni says, we were just shocked because on the headshot, he says, you could see this cone of brain and blood tissue shooting straight up in the sky. And they said he watched it like 15 or 20 times trying to figure out what frames they wanted selected, these 2 Secret Service guys. And so, but he says every time we got to that where this huge cone erupted in the sky, he says we were just like mesmerized by it. It was so shocking. So they select out the frames, and Brugioni goes to work on the briefing boards. He later fixes them up, gives them to Lundell, who presumably gives them to the CIA director. I think he made 2 sets. I'm not sure. Now, this was a highly classified operation. Lundell made it very clear to Brugioni, this is classified. This is top secret. This is compartmentalized. You will not discuss it with anybody within the CIA itself. You will keep it only within your team. And his team was told the same thing. And of course, they know what secret means in the CIA.
Yeah.
So the 2 Secret Service agents leave with the film. This is late at night, like 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that. It turns out that the very next night, on Sunday night, another team is summoned to NPIC, headed by a different guy, a guy named Homer McMahon, and another guy named Ben Hunter. And they're summoned there and told that they're going to be doing some briefing boards on a film. So a Secret Service agent shows up in the evening, Sunday evening, and he identifies himself as Bill Smith. And he says, I've just come from Hawkeye Works. This is the original Zapruder film. We need briefing boards. So they start doing the same thing they did Saturday night. The briefing boards, select the frames, watch the film, which of course raises the question, why are they doing this twice?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. Or why don't they bring Brugioni's team back to do it again? If something was unsatisfactory, you'd want to work with the other guys and find out what was going on. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the Sunday night team is sworn to secrecy too. They're told you cannot talk about this. So the Sunday night team never knew about the Saturday night team. And the Saturday night team never knew about the Sunday night team. In fact, when Peter Janney, along with a guy named Douglas Horn, who I've mentioned before, I think, when we were talking about the autopsy, they started interviewing Brugioni over a period of time where they were videotaping the interview. You can watch it online. You can see how lucid this guy is. Okay, he's 80, but he's as lucid as you and I are. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's they're interviewing him, and they're talking about the film, and he's describing what happened here. The white glove treatment, the deal. But they mentioned, well, there's a Sunday night team too. He goes, no, there wasn't. They said, oh, yeah, there was. He says, no, I was the duty officer in charge that weekend. The duty officer in charge knows everything. I would have known about it. They show him the briefing boards that were preserved from the Sunday night team. And he says, oh, my gosh. He was shocked that this is how compartmentalized it was. This is 45 years later. He learns what was going on Sunday night.
Wow. And the thing about it is, as they're working on that Saturday night, they're repeatedly, as you said, they're looking at the starkest frames from the event, literally as the brains are flying through the air over and over and over again, obviously, because that's going to be part of their presentation.
Exactly. So part of the pictures are going to be selected out for the briefing board.
Yeah. And then now he's seeing 45 years later, a completely different briefing board with other stills.
Yeah, and he knows it's not his because they're made differently. They don't have the hinge in the middle. They're on 4 boards instead of 2. Yeah. He knows it's not my briefing boards.
Wow, man.
Now, there's something important to note about the film that Bill Smith brings him from Hawkeye Works. It's a 16 millimeter film. Now, and it's the original. He says, this is the original that I've come from Hawkeye Works. And it looks like an original. It's like
you can't have a 16 millimeter 50-foot film. You can only have an 8 millimeter 50-foot film.
Well, this was 16 millimeter wide with it hadn't been slit yet.
Oh, with both directions going. Right.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
All right. Now there's something important to note about a 8 millimeter and a 16 millimeter film. That once you slit it down the middle, and a 16 millimeter wide film and convert it into an 8 millimeter film, you can't put it back together. You can't paste it. Okay. Right. So it remains an 8 millimeter film.
Right.
But here is a guy with the original Zapruder film that's 16 millimeters. Now, why would they do that? Well, most likely because they figured nobody figure out the difference anyway. I mean, this is the CIA. And in fact, it was kept secret for 45 so years. So pretty good assumption that there's secrets are going to be maintained. Yeah. But the way I surmise it is that this guy knew that Nitpig didn't have an 8 millimeter home camera. He didn't know about the Saturday night camera they had to go out and buy. They only dealt with 16 millimeters. So that's why they kept it in a 16 millimeter format.
Right.
But it's clearly a copy.
Right.
It has to be a copy.
It has to be. Yes.
Okay. There's no other way because you can't paste them together.
Right.
All right. Now, what's Hawkeye Works? Well, nobody knew about Hawkeye Works. It was a Kodak facility in Rochester, New York. That was their headquarters. They had big research and development there. Now, there's no indication that Kodak people were involved with this, but the CIA had a top secret film operation there in the middle of Kodak, that was known also within the CIA as Hawkeye Works.
And nobody knew. Hollywood level editing production capacity.
They could do anything that Hollywood could do.
Yeah.
Brugione confirmed that. Brugione says, I've been to Hawkeye Works, and there's a guy named Ed Green there. He told me we can do anything here, anything. And so did they have the capability of making a copy, high quality copy? Well, as a matter of fact, they did. And not on a Xerox machine or something like that, or a copier. They used what was called an optical printer that would copy an 8 millimeter film onto a 16 millimeter format. And even that could be blown up to I think 32 or 35 millimeter, so that they would have great big frames that they could then play with and alter. And that's what we contend they did, because there's no other reason to send it to this top secret facility. Nobody knew about the facility till the 1990s.
No,
it became public.
Yeah.
But what they did was they took the 8 millimeter film over there, they copied it onto a 16 millimeter format, maybe even blew it up bigger, and then painted a black patch on the back of the head. And then on the right side of the head, you'll see it in frame 313. it's like a bubble gum, big kind of like bubble gum explosion on the right side of the head on the Zapruder film, the extant film, the film we all see today. So Doug Horn has two friends in Hollywood that are in the motion picture business, and they get really high quality copies from the 6-4 Museum in Dallas, and they submit it to a team of experts whose credentials are impeccable. They're in my book, An Encounter with Evil, the Abraham Zapruder story. I mean, like long decades of experience in the motion picture business in Hollywood, and two of them, and I've got their statements, part of their statements in my book. They said, this is laughable. This is a joke. So this may have passed muster in '63, but this has been painted on. He says, you can see the black patch on the back of the head. And this is all fake coloring here, this red coloring here that's clearly been painted on.
Wow.
That was confirmed also by a guy named Noel Twyman, who wrote a great book called Bloody Treason I think it was back in the 70s. He took it to the same kind of expert, Hollywood expert, that said the same thing. So Janney and Horn, well, first of all, what happened to Brugioni's briefing boards? Okay. Brugioni says, well, there was an investigation, I think it was called the Rockefeller Commission. I think it was in the 70s.
Yeah.
They were investigating nefarious activity on the part of the CIA, and they got wind of the fact that there's a Zapruder film. And so Brugioni had one of the briefing boards that he had prepared in his office. I don't know how it got back to him or whatever, whether he had just kept it or what, but he takes it into his boss at that point, a guy named Hicks, and says, hey, I thought you guys might need this, very innocently. I thought you might need my briefing boards for the Rockefeller Commission hearings. And Hicks blows up, explodes, starts cussing. What are you doing with that in here? Where'd you get that? What are you doing? I mean, the guy just freaked out, and Brugioni is saying, like, what's going on?
Wow, too much caffeine this morning, buddy? How you doing?
Exactly.
Wow.
He says, get it out of here. I don't want it. And so Brugioni goes and leaves it in the office of the CIA director. Never again are his briefing boards seen. Okay. So the only briefing boards were left were the Sunday night teams. So here's the clincher, Guard. Janney and Horn, during their interviews, show Brugioni the Zapruder film, the extant film.
Oh, man.
Brugioni's watching this film and he goes, no, that is not the film I saw.
And he could probably point out to them exactly where the changes were.
Well, the most significant thing he pointed out to him was with respect to the headshot.
Right.
Because he says, are you telling me there's only one frame that shows the headshot? They said, yeah, that's frame 13. That's it. No. There was multiple frames on the headshot, which is logical. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, it makes total sense. Absolutely.
Yeah. But they had finished with deleting the frames on the headshot and leaving this one and then painting it over.
Right.
And he goes, no. And then guess what? There's no big plume up there on the Zapruder film that he's watching.
And I'll just say this, Jacob, because I went to film school and I started editing film, 8mm film, on my dad's editor, and then I was working on those platforms, those platters at Boston University with 16mm film. So I'm intimately aware with intimately familiar with film editing, not still photography, but film editing. And it's very, very clear, it's obvious when you're missing frames. Everybody can tell just as visual viewers, but as a person who's done the splicing and the gluing and all those different types of things, what they had to have done. This is just amazing.
Yeah. Now keep in mind, they're not altering the original film.
Right.
They're altering a very high quality copy of the film.
Right.
That is good enough to be portrayed as an original. That was how crystal clear these copies would come out of the optical printer. That's how quality this machine was. So he goes, no, no, no. He says there was this huge plume. That's what we were mesmerized about.
Absolutely. But
Now,
they had
here's
to
a-
remove they had to remove that plume, because otherwise
Exactly.
it would show you the direction from which the bullet had been shot. And to show
Exactly.
you it's an exit wound, clearly.
Exactly.
Right.
And they had to paint over the back of the head to disguise the fact that that was an exit wound.
Wow.
And there were actually some bystanders, I forget their name, they're mentioned in my book, that said the same thing, that the most remarkable thing they saw about the assassination, not the film, witnessing the assassination, was this big blowout in the back of President Kennedy's head.
Yeah.
And the husband, the wife, and the daughter all said the same thing. I forget their names. And so here's another factor. Around 50 to 60 witnesses in Dealey Plaza that witnessed the assassination stated unequivocally that there was a stop, complete stop of the limousine, or a near stop before the headshot, which obviously incriminates the driver and William Greer, but it also incriminates the passenger, Roy Kellerman, who, by the way, was involved in the casket switching episode.
That's right. That's right.
And he was in charge of the Secret Service team at Parkland Hospital that forced their way out at gunpoint with the body.
Mm-hmm.
So Kellerman was having a busy day, but in the passenger seat, his job was to jump over after the first shot and cover the president with his body. It's his job as a Secret Service agent, protecting the president, give up his own life to protect the president. He sat there like a bump on the log until the headshot came in, and then they took off. But these witnesses, 50 or 60 people, said, no, it made a stop or a near stop. The Zapruder film doesn't show either. Doesn't show the stop or a near stop, which means they had to delete the frames there that showed that stop or near stop. Now, notice that the most dramatic thing about the Zapruder film today, the one we all see, is the violent back and left to the left motion of President Kennedy. Now, the people who saw this, the original, the real Zapruder film, never talked about that. Never highlighted it. When Dan Rather was reporting on the film, he didn't comment on that. That's the most dramatic part of the film. That's where Oliver Stone in the movie JFK, where Kevin Costner is saying, back into the left, back into the left. Right. It's this dramatic, shot that clearly is a frontal shot because it's driving the president back.
Right.
Nobody comments on that in the original film. And I suspect that the reason for that is that when you delete frames, the other frames get compressed. Right. So they amplify something that really wasn't amplified. You just put it together, and what was a gradual type thing turned into this violent back into the left type thing. The other interesting thing is that the presidential limousine is turning left from Houston Street onto Elm Street, where he was assassinated. Yeah. That turn they had to make this huge wide turn because the angle was so sharp. It violated all the Secret Service protocols. They were never supposed to have that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah. In fact, some people said the car even went up on the sidewalk. It was making this turn. Wow. But Zapruder starts filming as the turn is being made, which is logical. He's there to film the president. This is a memento for his grandchildren or whatever, show him. And he was so it makes sense. He's going to film the motorcade as it's coming toward him. Yeah. He's not interested in filming the motorcade after it passes him. Right. The back of it. So it would be logical for him to start filming when it starts to turn and comes to him. And if he runs out of film, that's fine. He's got the whole thing coming toward him. Right. Well, the Zapruder film doesn't show that. The one we see. It shows, and by the way, Zapruder said that's when he started filming. And his assistant, Marilyn Sisman, said the same thing. She was standing right next to him. She was holding him up because he has vertigo. He was on the grassy knoll in front of the limousine. He said, we started filming on the turn. But if you look at the Zapruder film, right after the turn, starts to make the turn so that you can't see this difficulty they were making with the turn,
Yep.
it stops. And all of a sudden it jumps forward to a place on Elm Street that's right before the assassination.
That's right. There's a jump. That's right. Yeah.
So it's like, why would they do that? Well, because it's very incriminating.
They wanted to cover up. Exactly. They wanted to cover up the way the car was moving.
How the car was moving, because much easier to hit a slowing car.
And I'll just say this too, Jacob, that the fact that she was holding him up, and the fact that he got vertigo, because, as he's looking through there, he has to have one eye closed, and he's got the other eye there. So there's a weird perspective thing. Clearly, if she's holding him up, then she knows exactly when he started as well. So that confirms you have another person testifying to the fact that he started filming then.
Exactly.
Wow.
And in fact, his partner had told him, you need to start filming early because this is the end of the motorcade. He says, you're probably not even going to get anything because they're going to be going 60 miles an hour. Oh. And so as far as Zapruder was concerned, once they show up, he's got to assume that they're going to speed out of there because the crowd was very sparse. I mean,
they were all done. They considered that was the end of it. They were all done. They weren't literally on parade anymore. They were finishing the parade and they were going to head out, right?
Exactly. There was sparse crowds there. They were not the thousands of people on Main Street. So it'd be logical you'd say, I better start filming when the turn's coming and just keep going. And if I run out of film, fine. But you don't want to wait and say, well, I think I'll get near and wait till he gets near me and then I'll do it.
Yeah,
because he might be going 60, 70 miles an hour at that point.
Yeah.
So that's what convicts the CIA of the assassination, because like a fraudulent autopsy, there's nothing innocent about it. There's nothing innocent about a fraudulent film. That once you realize this was a fraudulent film, their goose is cooked. That they're embroiled in this assassination as much as the military is.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, too, because after one learns about the two coffins and the fake autopsy, very clearly, if they've got some film footage that shows that it doesn't conform with the autopsy, they got to fix the footage. And so they did. That's exactly what they did.
Oh, and it's brilliant. You see, it's brilliant because who's going to question? I mean, you bring up, well, I think the film's altered. Are you crazy? A film altering? Boy, conspiracy theory. It was absolutely brilliant because nobody's going to ever think about the possibility. But there was no other reason to send it to Hawkeye Works. I mean, they could clearly see the film in the 8mm format in Washington. What's the purpose of sending it to Hawkeye Works?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I remember as a kid, when we would get our film developed, it would always go to Rochester, New York, to the Kodak place in Rochester, and then reading about all the facilities that they had there, and then finding out that there's a federal facility there, then very clearly you say to yourself, well, the only reason that they would send it there is to get it to that federal facility. That's all. And why would they want it to go to a federal facility? Obviously, to manipulate it.
Exactly. There's no other reason. No other logical reason.
Now, so, Jacob,
in retrospect, let me just sum this up, that what happens then is the film goes to Chicago, but instead of going to the plant of Life magazine, it's diverted to Washington, most likely at the airport there in Chicago. It's sent to Chicago. Remember, Stoley leaves around noon or so, goes to Chicago, 2-hour flight or so. Then it's put on another flight to Washington, where it arrives that night. Now, let me point out something else very interesting. There are a couple of things. You'll love this. So how would they get Life magazine to cooperate in this scheme? Well, Life magazine, their publisher is a guy named C.D. Jackson. Now, you can Google C.D. Jackson or ChatGPT C.D. Jackson. You'll see that he has very close ties to the CIA. He's embroiled with the CIA on part of Operation Mockingbird, where they had assets in the Main Street Press.
Sure.
But his time with the CIA goes back to the OSS, the Office of, I forget what it's called, something security, World War II. So he and the CIA were joined at the hip. So it would have been no problem just getting the C.D. Jackson to cooperate, say, hey, we got national security here. This is the day of the assassination. I mean, there's the whole country's, in shock. And so it's no problem to tell Jackson, hey, look, this is national security. And not only that, but the owner of Life magazine, name escapes me for a second here, he had close ties to the CIA as well. So that wasn't any problem at all. In fact, when Life magazine gets the Zapruder film, they sign the contract with Zapruder saying, well, part of the contract is we're going to give you extra money from the sale of the motion picture when we start making money there. But remember, they had no capability of doing that. After Life magazine gets the Zapruder film, they announce that they're never going to show it, ever. They're locking it away and nobody will ever see it. And what's their rationale? They say, well, we want to protect the American people from violence, from watching violence. And so this is in the interest of the American people. And so they lock it away in a vault, Gardner. And
I remember it was years and years they had that in there.
It wasn't until 1975, some 12 years later, that where some bootleg copies had gotten out. And it's shown on Geraldo Rivera's show.
Right.
And the whole nation just is in shock over this thing.
And I always wonder, because those were bootlegs, not of the original, clearly. They were bootlegs of the manipulated version. And I always wondered if they intentionally leaked those.
Possibly, but I don't think so, because they did not want anybody to see this film, especially like Zapruder, who might notice that there's some frames missing from his film.
Right.
Which in my book, I posit that he did know. That he knew that his film would be altered. This is the dark secret of Abraham Zapruder that I detail in my book. It's really
the nefarious things that were done to some of the people who actually knew what the original film was like. Those stories are amazing. They're crazy.
I'm not familiar with that part of it. I don't know. Setting that aside, I got one more thing to tell you about Life magazine.
Yeah.
Okay. So, right after the president was declared dead, two of the treating physicians, Dr. Malcolm Perry and Dr. Kemp Clark, highly respected surgeons, had a press conference. Now, keep in mind that Parkland Hospital is one of the premier trauma hospitals in the country. I mean, they specialize in gunshot wounds. It's a teaching hospital. They teach doctors who are going to be specializing in treating gunshot wounds, knife wounds, and so forth.
Yeah.
These guys, they're at the top of the game as far as trauma cases are concerned. They have a press conference. Now, they're not pathologists, and they didn't do an autopsy, but they said, well, Kennedy had a bullet hole right here that was clearly an entry wound. It was the size of a bullet. He had a big hole back here that implies an exit wound. It's a blowout because the bullet's pushing brain material out in front of it. And so this is a big problem for the official narrative, because Oswald, the supposed shooter, is supposedly firing from the rear. Okay, so these are shots coming from the front, according to these two doctors. So there's variations of the autopsy report that are evolving even after the autopsy, like on Saturday. And they're trying to deal with how they're going to handle this neck wound here. And Life magazine publishes an article by one of their longtime reporters, a highly respected guy. I forget his name now, but it's in my book. And this guy says, well, in the Zapruder film, which was locked away now, this was like a couple weeks or 10 days, something like that, or maybe a week after the assassination, says, well, the Zapruder film shows, and he should know because Life magazine has the Zapruder film, but nobody else does, shows that Kennedy turned to face the school book depository when the shot came through the front. That explains the shot. Well, when people saw the film on Geraldo Rivera, the new film, Kennedy never turns around at all. No. It was just a flat out lie.
Right.
But it shows you the problem that they were having. Now, that's a clear fraud. I mean, because they knew the Zapruder film didn't have that. Now, my hunch is that reporter did not see the Zapruder film. He was just told what it had, because I can't imagine that he would risk his entire career on a flagrant lie like that. I mean, he sees the Zapruder film and makes up this story.
Yeah.
But it goes to show you the lengths they were going to try to make all the pieces work.
I'm curious, Jacob, based on the damage that would have been done with that exit wound and the direction in which it would have gone as the vehicle was moving, it's probably not possible because the clarity of any of the shots wouldn't really show it. Maybe the camera moves past it, but you would think there would be material left on the back of the car where Jackie goes, or on the street, glistening on the street. Has anybody ever brought that up?
Well, in fact, there was. Everybody thought initially that when she crawled out on the back of the car, that she was trying to get out of there, escape the scene, because these shots are being fired. Her husband's just been shot, head's blown up. But in fact, she established later that what she was doing was trying to get his brain tissue back there.
I remember that now. She was trying to collect his brain tissue. I remember I remember hearing that. Yes.
I mean, obviously pretty illogical, but when you're in shock, she was grabbing the brain tissue so the doctors could put it back in and preserve it, And so that's when the Secret Service agent jumps on the back of the car. Now, your other point is very good too, because they actually found a piece of occipital bone the next day. Occipital, remember the occipital region's the lower back in the middle of the skull.
Yeah.
So there's a medical student that's walking around Dealey Plaza and finds a piece of occipital bone there in the grass.
Wow.
Well, lo and behold, his uncle, I think it was his uncle, is a pathologist at Methodist Hospital in Dallas. So he takes this occipital bone to his uncle, who puts together a team of pathologists to examine the bone. And they take pictures of the bone, like you're supposed to do when you're doing like an autopsy.
Sure.
And they determine that this is, in fact, occipital bone that's coming from the back of the skull, which is part of this hole that was there. They take pictures of it. They write it up, say, this is occipital bone. They send it to Washington.
Uh-oh.
It's never seen again.
Yeah. Big mistake. Big mistake.
But they still have pictures of it, and
wow.
It's kind of hard to decipher it with a photograph, but this is a team of first-class pathologists at Methodist Hospital that examines this bone and comes up and says, this came from the back of his skull.
Wow, that is amazing. Jacob, what about any other people who might have been filming or anything like that at the time? What about other sources of visuals that might have been available? Anything about that is concrete?
Yeah, they were other films. I forget how many, 3 or 4 something, but they confiscated them there. Oh,
man.
And there's one woman that had a guy, I forget his name, but pretty famous case.
Yeah.
He had his film confiscated, and when it came back, he said, they didn't give me my original. They gave me a copy.
Of course. Right.
And he says, and my copy is altered.
Yep.
It's an altered copy. And she, the daughter of this guy, or granddaughter, one or the other, I can't remember her name, but she ended up writing Gail Nix. And their father's last name was Nix. I forget his first name. But they've recently sued the government for the return of their original film. And the government moved to dismiss, and the federal judge says, no, I'm not going to dismiss. We're going to figure out. Yeah.
Wow.
And so it's still in the news, this next film. But what everybody thinks is that they took the original so that it would match up with what they were doing with the Zapruder film.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Other people had their film confiscated or photographs confiscated. They never saw them again.
Wow.
So,
I gotta put you in touch with Don Jeffries, and his work. He's really done a lot of research on this because you would just match up so well on this. Man.
Well, there's people who have examined the film itself that say there's weird stuff like this part of the motorcade's moving and supposedly there's something supposed to be happening in the background under a regular film, but instead the people are like kind of frozen there or something like that, like anomalies that shouldn't exist. But I'm not a film expert. I never went down that road, but I would invite people to look at my book. I mean, it's really a mystery story because the granddaughter of Abraham Zapruder wrote a book on the Zapruder film, and she starts out her book said we had a family taboo against discussing the Zapruder film in my family, that you could not do it. She didn't use the word taboo, but she said we were prohibited from discussing this, and so she decided to study the reasons for the taboo, which were ridiculous. And so I wrote this book saying she got it wrong on what the family taboo was, and my thesis was Zapruder had figured out what they had done to his film. And he kept quiet, not only for fear, tremendous fear of what they would do to him. I mean, condemn him as a conspiracy theorist. This guy was Jewish. All the anti-Semites would be coming out in Dallas. He'd lose his dress business up, all the sales and so forth. He decided to keep his head down and stay quiet. And
you can imagine what they could do to his family, setting them up to make it look like they had engaged in felonies in the future. They have a very long time frame under which they will work to undermine anybody.
Exactly.
So, wow.
So that's why I think led to this family taboo, and they made a lot of money off the film. The Zapruder family did.
Yes, that's true. Boy, that's interesting that she took that approach, though, that she wanted to explore it.
Very courageous move, because I said, when you go start studying the family taboo, you're likely to come up with some dark secrets.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. And and I also wanted to mention, I discussed this for the audience, Jacob, your very large new piece on those three women who were researching the assassination, and it's based on something you read in the Atlantic. And it's just a remarkable piece that you wrote. And I love how about midway through you start talking about that's weird. All these different things that are weird. And it's funny, too, because I'll just mention as an aside, it's a little bit colorful. But one of my buddies who came from Salem, Mass, always used to use the term weird. And he would say, oh, it's really weird. And he just had this way of saying it that was hilarious. And then later, Iggy Pop of Iggy and the Stooges came out with an album called The Weirdness. So every time I read your article, I kept thinking of those two things. I was going through it. Very memorable piece. We'll have to talk about that again because it's an interesting personal story for these women. It's an interesting way to show that they themselves had obviously seen some problems, that there were reasons to look into this. But this Zapruder film, this inspired you to write an entire book. And how long ago was that published?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm
going to go over to Amazon and so we can show it on the screen here.
But I want to mention this article that you talked about. This 10,000 word article, very long, on this woman's book. I consider it the best article I've ever written on the JFK assassination. I spent, I can't tell you how many hours, 10 or 15 hours writing this article. It is the most complete analysis I think this woman's book inspired me to put this article together. In fact, she also inspired me to do a video commentary that we'll be posting tomorrow or Monday. It's an hour and a half long.
That'll be at the YouTube for FFF?
Yeah.
Yeah. And people get the email. It'll be inside. The link will be inside their email as well, right?
Yeah, and she defaults to this lone nut thing, which really diminishes the significance of her book. I tell her, no, your book is much more profound than you think it is. But lo and behold, last night she was putting on a book forum at a really nice bookstore in Washington, D.C. called Politics and Prose. I showed up.
Oh, that's great. I know that store. I know that store very well. Yep.
Yeah. So, I bought a book and I said, would you sign my book? And I said, I'm the guy who sent you my article. I sent her a copy of my article and she goes, oh, thank you for sending the article. And she's a very nice person, just as nice as she could be. And then I said, I got a gift for you. And I gave her an autographed copy of the Kennedy Autopsy.
Wow.
So
Great.
I'm out. She laughingly says, "Oh, I'm going on vacation next week. I'll have time to read it."
Wow. I'm going to
A nice way to ruin a vacation.
Well, she'll be inspired to write another book. She'll be inspired.
Oh, it'd be awesome.
And so there's Kennedy Autopsy 1 and Kennedy Autopsy 2. And then over, of course, on Amazon, under your name, we also have Encounter with Evil. There we go. The Zapruder
Okay, what year?
What's that?
What year was it published in? I'd guess 5 years ago, but
let's see. Yeah, let's see. We'll go over to the details. See all details. 2022. There you go. March 16th, 2022.
Okay, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. Holy smoke.
And like I say, it's not just a technical thing about the film and stuff. It's really kind of a mystery as to what was going on in the Zapruder family with this taboo. So I think people will really enjoy it. I really loved writing that book. It was just a very enjoyable experience trying to solve this mystery.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because we opened the show for an hour talking about the cover-ups and the way they massaged the message and the money that was going into the Wuhan lab and Fauci's lies and all these different types of things and the machinations of the people behind that, and how, as you probably heard me say when you were in the back room, Donald Trump did not stand up for the Bill of Rights. Donald Trump's unconstitutional declaration of a medical emergency triggered this national model state health emergency plan that was promulgated out of Johns Hopkins after 9/11 and after the anthrax scare stuff. And we see so many states breaking the Bill of Rights, cracking down on the First, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth, 14th Amendments. And that itself is this incredible controversy where many people who should be held to account they're not going to be held to account. And we know they're right in front of us. They're very, very clearly criminal elements. They were operating in very, very nefarious ways. They made a lot of money off of this stuff. People's livelihoods got destroyed on a national and international level. Thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps millions of people suffered or died. And we've got this connection that goes to all these people deep inside the deep state post-World War II as the CIA is gathering strength. And of course, we see all the ways that they're working on the warfare national security state. And it's incredible to see that back then, really nobody answered for their crimes. And again, maybe there'll be no success for getting people to answer for their crimes today, but getting this knowledge out there is just really admirable, and it's very interesting. It's a weird mystery story. It's a strange thing to see how they managed this thing, and they pulled it off.
They pulled it off, and nobody's going to be held accountable. Everybody's dead that was involved in it, but that's not what's important. What's important is that you still have the apparatus that did this, the national security state, which was a massive conversion of the federal government after World War II, unconstitutional. We had a limited government republic. They became a national security state with omnipotent powers. There's no due process clause when it comes to the CIA. They can assassinate anybody they want. And we see that on the high seas and near Venezuela. They assassinate people in boats. Doesn't matter. Nobody's going to be held to account. So the reason I keep harping on this assassination, along with others, the effort to assassinate Castro, these Patrice Lumumba, Soleimani, the Iranian general, is that we still have this apparatus. It's an evil apparatus called a national security state that we need to dismantle. And this is why Kennedy's legacy is so important, and this assassination is so important. We haven't even talked about the motive here, the war that was taking place between Kennedy and the national security establishment, because Kennedy took him on, Guard. He took him on directly, and he lost. He lost on the streets
break
of Dallas.
him up.
He was going to destroy the CIA. And he had lost any confidence in the military, and he was going to move America in a totally different direction. He announced that publicly while the war was on.
You know, it's interesting, Jacob, because coming from a Generation X person, I never was that interested in the Kennedy assassination. And in fact, I think a lot of people my generation, I don't want to speak out of turn for any of those people who might disagree with me, but I think a lot of people I knew in my generation actually resented the boomers and how devoted they were to their time period, to Woodstock, the anti-war movement, the assassination of JFK, RFK, and Martin Luther King, the rise of some of these opposition groups like the Black Panthers, the death of Malcolm X. That was all stuff that happened before, we were cognizant of anything. And so since the boomers were so numerous and since they basically dominated pop culture, we weren't interested in that. In fact, not only were we not interested in it, we resented having people talk about it so much. And it's only now that you get older that you can or that I get older, that I can sort of connect and see how this must have just eviscerated people to see these sorts of things happening, especially for people who were aware of these terrible figures in the government. And it's very interesting because, as you say, it's imperative to know that this line of thinking and these people, generation to generation, they're still there. It's incredible.
Yeah, they're the successors to the people of the 60s. And this is why this book that we're talking about, called Housewives Underground by Caitlin Tiffany.
Yeah.
She works for The Atlantic, but her book is independent, I think, of The Atlantic. That her book is so significant. I couldn't put it down because she's talking about these three women and others in this first generation of critics that right after the assassination said, this is really weird stuff here. We're going to start researching this. This is something nefarious is going on here. And a brilliant lawyer, a guy named Vince Salandria, immediately said, no, this is a hit, man. This is a national security state hit. He figured it out right away. But these women, she tells the story of these women, how courageous they were and how they all started their own little investigation into the assassination independent of each other and how they became friends. And I couldn't put the book down. I really recommend it, even though she defaults to the lone nut theory of the assassination. It's kind of logical that she would, because the women's story kind of fizzled out before the 1990s when everything starts to break loose with respect to the fraudulent autopsy.
Well, it is interesting.
I highly recommend the book.
Yeah, and I noticed, I put it up on the screen there because, as you mentioned right there, it is a great read. And in fact, once I got into it, I couldn't put it down. And as you say, the human interest side of it, of these three women coming together, becoming friends, sort of becomes the legacy of the book as one reads it. But you took a different perspective. And that's why you have a 10,000 word article about this, because you basically said the reasons that all these women independently got interested in this are important not to overlook. And that's where, you go down into your article and you talk about the weirdness that they noticed, all these very, very strange things that they noticed. So it's the personal interest side of it probably attracts a lot of people. And it really would be interesting if the author of the book, and I'll read the book again, The Housewives Underground, The Untold Story of the Women Who Made the JFK Assassination Our Most Enduring Mystery, by Caitlin Tiffany. So it'd be interesting if Caitlin Tiffany reapproaches this story and looks more at the assassination itself after she's done the human interest story of the three women. That'd be interesting to see. Oh,
it'd be fascinating. I mean, that's why I was sort of planting a seed by sending her my article and then giving her a copy of my book. And I mean, there's a good chance she says, look, I've read my book. I'm moving on with my life on other things, because she's not an assassination buff. She doesn't seem to have this desire to really examine it, but you never know. She may say, because what I'm telling her, here you are admiring these women for their courage and their conviction that something's wrong here. Well, to me, she kind of owes it to herself to say, well, I need to really see whether they were right or not. She's assuming they were wrong.
Right.
And I'm saying, no, you got it all wrong. These women were the foundation that lead all the way up to the fraudulent autopsy, this direct line. And I really emphasize in that video, which I think we're posting tomorrow, that there's this direct line from these women up to the 2000s. The fraudulent autopsy.
It's incredible. You get me thinking, Jacob, about James Bovaard's work, and he has all his books with the rights, lost rights, last rights, and so on and so forth, and different people who come up in different generations to write about these topics that are so important within American history. I mean, just groundbreaking pieces, whether it's your work on the JFK assassination, or it's your work in other areas, or it's people like the Austrian economists and what they did with subjective marginal utility theory, or it's a guy like Jim Bovaard writing about this sort of stuff, or Andrew Napolitano has done a lot on that front as well. These things, they're so valuable and they're so rich to be able to pass on to other people, to buy a copy and give it to somebody else to say, listen, check this out. I think not only is this interesting and engaging, but it's going to open a door, and then you can see some of the machinery that's still ticking. And we don't want that machinery ticking. It's very, very bad. So I really, we'll talk about the Housewives Underground story. And I know that, in the emails, I mentioned how great that was. And you were surprised that, oh, you read it. Cool. And that was great. And it was great. It was great. In fact, not only did I read it, I listened to it as well. Like, I went through it twice because it was so big and so interesting. And so I thought it was terrific. And, that's the sort of thing that if you were to release that as its own pamphlet or something on Amazon, it might itself attract, give you another avenue to get people to look at it. If they don't happen to go over to the FFF website, that might be a nice way to do it as well.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Yeah. I want to respond to your point about Jim Bovaard. Bovaard's been writing for us and has been a good friend for 30-something years at the Future of Freedom Foundation. He is one of my real life heroes. I mean, this guy is just heroic. His work on Ruby Ridge and Waco was so insightful, so courageous. I mean, he was taking the government on. Those were scary days when people were scared that the government was going to really come slamming down hard on dissidents, especially after Oklahoma City, which was in retaliation for what had happened at Waco. Bovaard never flinched. I mean, it's just a real honor to be his friend. He's heroic.
He's a great, great guy. And again, I was reading his books when I was an older teen, and then I got to know him and become friends. And that was just terrific. And then I'll tell you, David Knight, filling in for David, you might not be aware of this, Jacob, but remember the folks at Bundy Ranch in Nevada a number of years ago when they had that farm, and the Bureau of Land Management wanted to basically run them off their land, and the land was going to be taken by Harry Reid for his son to build a solar plant in that area. And there were so many important, at least constitutional and ethical parts of it, which is, of course, as you and I know, according to the Constitution, any territory that becomes a state is supposed to enter with all the so-called rights and privileges of any other state. There's nothing in the Constitution that demands states cede land to the federal government. And even if they could, there's nothing in the Constitution that allows the federal government to run anything except three forms of land: a 10 square mile area for the capital, territories, and military garrisons. So if Nevada is not a territory and it becomes a state, the land that Nevada agreed for the Bundys to be their farmland is supposed to be between Nevada and the Bundys. That's all. So David Knight was there at the Bundy Ranch with the Bundys when the Bureau of Land Management was out there in the desert breaking their water pipes for the cattle, trying to kill the cattle, and putting snipers on overpasses as the Bundys and others approached unarmed on horses and on foot, knowing that they could be shot at any time. David was there. He was there covering that. Yeah. So it's incredible to think about some of these people, and God, rest his soul. I'll also compliment, of all people, G. Gordon Liddy on the Ruby Ridge stuff, because G. Gordon Liddy, with all of his various background from the Nixon times, he was one of the people who really spoke up about Waco and Ruby Ridge. And he was spot on about that, about the natural rights and about the lack of due process and the way that Lon Horiuchi, had been involved and how he got advanced and got, no pushback whatsoever. And I think he probably based a lot of what he was saying on his reading of Jim Bovard at the time, probably.
Oh, interesting. I'd forgotten that Liddy was playing a role in that.
Yeah. I got to meet Mr. Liddy, and
really.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was at, the Institute for Humane Studies, obviously. Yeah. I went down there for an IHS anniversary, and, Marty Zupan was there and so on. And Gordon was there.
At IHS?
Yeah, he was there. It was one of the things that, I can't remember what hotel where it was happening, but he was there. And
as a guest or as a speaker?
He was just a guest. He was just a guest.
Really? That's amazing.
So I don't know if he might have been a supporter. Maybe he was a supporter of them, but it was interesting. And the funny thing was that night, I've mentioned this before, that night, this is kind of a crazy story, Jacob, but about maybe 7 months or 6 months before that, I had called into Laura Ingram's radio show when it was starting, right? And I had some disagreements with her and so on, but I had called in. And I guess she liked a point that I made or something. And I mentioned music or something just before I went off. And she goes, yeah. And I was like, wouldn't it be nice if blah, 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 blah. I was talking to something constitutional. She said, yeah. And she goes, who is this guy? Get this guy's number. So I go to they're going to a commercial, and the producer comes back on. His name is Taylor. And he says, yeah, Guard. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, she wants your number. And I was like, wait, what? And he goes, no, yeah, she does. She wants your number. And I was like, okay. So it was early cell phone days, and I had my cell phone, and I gave him my number. And then later, a few months later, like 3 months later, I never got a call or anything. A few months later, I called, and, I happened to say, give a comment or something like that off the air. They couldn't put me on because they didn't have enough time. And I said, oh, Guard, we got your number on the cork board. I was like, well, tell her to give me a call, right? So she still didn't call, but I just so happened to call before I was driving down for the IHS anniversary dinner and in Washington. And I talked to Taylor, and Taylor said, oh, you're coming to DC? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to this dinner for the Institute for Humane Studies. They're connected with George Mason, And he goes, oh, hey. He goes, come a little early, stop by the studio. I'll introduce you to Laura.
Wow.
But I got caught in traffic. And in fact, I got so caught in traffic, in order to get into my tuxedo, I had to stop in an alley and change inside my car. And that's
what a shame.
It was pretty funny. It was pretty funny stuff. Yeah, in fact,
this is your opportunity for worldwide fame, and you blew it.
It was crazy. And the only other thing that I'll mention was I went to I don't know if you're familiar with Stan Evans, M. Stanton Evans, and so on. So Stan, I went to one of the National Journalism Center things where Mal Klein and a number of other people, Tom Winter, former editor of Human Events. I stayed with the Winters on 16th Street or 4th Street. So I did a journalism internship with the National Journalism Center, and they were doing an anniversary as well. And Stan was going to be there and so on. And I think they were debuting one of his books there. And so we finished the whole party and everything, and it was a lot of fun. In fact, I saw Marty Zupan there. That was kind of fun. And so I got in the elevator, and I'm in the elevator with John Fund of the Wall Street Journal and what's her name? Ann Coulter. So, I'm thinking Ann Coulter's really bombastic, and, we don't necessarily agree, and so on and so forth. So we start chatting in the elevator on the way down. I got my bag with me. I'm in another tux. So she's like, hey, you want to come for drinks for us at the Washington Hotel? Like, we just met. I just gotten in the elevator. We're just talking. By the time we get down, she'd asked me if I wanted to go to the hotel with her and John and a couple other people. So I went. We're on the rooftop overlooking the White House on a beautiful summer night. I'm there with Ann Coulter. She's telling me about how she loves the Grateful Dead. And I'm like, it was nuts. It was just crazy.
Okay, yeah. I've got an elevator story to match yours.
All right.
So I'm at a Mont Pelerin Society meeting,
Oh,
and we're in a hotel, and I get into the elevator, and who else comes in? There's three of us in the elevator, but Milton and Rose Friedman.
what?
And so I said, I mean, this was like the highlight of my life.
Yeah.
And I said, Professor Friedman, I'm Jacob Hornberger. And Rose, this is the man that does that little journal, that little calendar book. It's awesome. I was like, oh my gosh, this Nobel laureate hero of mine knows who I am. It's like, wow.
Shoot, that's so cool. That's great. And it's nice when you get that recognition. You know, if you'd only had a copy of Monetary History of the United States, you could have been like, hey, can you sign this copy? And it would like unfolds, you know, like 4 feet. Cause you know, the way the interior of that has all those charts that are like 5 feet long, you know?
Yeah, that was pretty much the second highlight. One of these days I'll have to share with you my story of when I met Elvis Presley, which was the highlight of my life.
Oh, I remember you mentioned a little bit about that. We'll have to, that is a, you know, sometime we'll just have to talk some fun stuff, and that'll be great. And then I'll tell you I won't even go into it now. But listen, Jacob, just terrific to talk to you, Jacob. And you know what? Maybe some night we can get Jim on and you on at the same time. That would be fun. We could have like a trio of people talking. And again, I'll see if Don Jeffries can join us sometime to talk about JFK, because I think you guys would be real simpatico. He's a great guy.
Both of those things would be awesome. And to go on with Jim would just, I mean, he is such a hoot to interact with. I mean,
yeah.
he is like the epitome of cynicism.
Oh,
when it comes to the government. It's great.
Just, you can just see the middle finger just getting raised like a fishing pole every time. He's like, yeah, giving it to the man, you know? Man.
Yeah, man, it's really nice to reminisce. I mean, for those of your listeners that don't know what IHS is, I mean, it's the Institute for Humane Studies goes all the way back to the Foundation for Economic Education days under Leonard Reed. Baldy Harper, who founded IHS, started out at FEE, went over, founded IHS, and it supports young scholars and academics. It's fantastic. And it had seminars and conferences like you went to.
Yeah,
that are academic.
It's strange too, because I remember the first IHS seminar I attended, my dad suggested there was an ad like in Reason or something like that, or Liberty Magazine. And he said, hey, Gard, why don't you, apply for that? And it was just such a wonderful feast for the mind. You know, you're meeting these professors. Tyler Cowan was there, and Richard Henderson was there. Richard gave me the copy of his book that he had edited, The Fortune Encyclopedia of Economics. He just gave it to me. He goes, here, Gard. And I was like, wow, this is great. So it was terrific it was a wonderful experience. And the fascinating thing is coming as a second or third generation person in there, and then learning how all these people were connected. I'll give you one final thing, Jacob. There used to be a bookstore in Boston. You probably, when I mention the name, it might ring a bell. It was called the Avenue Victor Hugo. It was on Newbury Street in Boston, right near Boylston Street. And it was actually right next to Synchro Sound, where the Cars recording studio was located. And it was famous in Boston because Harlan Ellison, the science fiction writer who wrote one of the most famous Star Trek stories, City on the Edge of Forever, that had William Shatner falls in love with a woman back in World War II. Harlan Ellison, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, he actually used to boast that he wrote a short story every day, one short story every day. And so somebody said, oh, yeah, I dare you. So he sat in the front window of Avenue Victor Hugo and wrote a short story. And they still had the table and the chair in the store when I would go there when I went to Boston University. So it turns out Avenue Victor Hugo, I had visited occasionally once I left BU, and there's some crazy stories about getting Twilight Zone magazines there when I was a kid and so on. But I found out that they had relocated into New Hampshire, and so I went to their new location, and I'm looking at their day that they opened. They had their first dollar bill and a photograph, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, I think it was Hans Hermann Hoppe was in the picture, and I'm like, is that Hoppe? And I was like, "Are you guys libertarians?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." Like, "Oh yeah, you didn't know that?" I was like, "No, I didn't." And it turns out they've got all this Hazlitt stuff and all this stuff in a different section. I'm like, "This is awesome. You guys are great." And I'm glad so I was glad I gave them a lot of my money,
That's an awesome story. That's great.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And these guys was like 1970 when, the Libertarian Party was just kicking off and stuff. It's pretty neat. So good stuff. Good stuff. Thanks, Jacob. Great work.
It's always so much fun to talk with you. You inspire me. You get my batteries charged up. Thank you for giving me the time to share this part of the assassination of John Kennedy with your viewers and listeners. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be here with you, Gard.
Absolutely right. We have many connections. If my parents were here, my parents are smiling down at us right now. And I'll tell you the Twilight Zone story later. I got a picture of Rod Serling right over there, and he's telling me, tell him that story sometime. So I'll do that from a fifth dimension sometime.
I would love it.
All right, Jacob. Well, listen, we'll say God bless and live long and prosper. And thank you again for all this fantastic work. FFF.org. We'll make sure people head over there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Bye-bye. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Well, everybody, just great to chat with Jacob. I hope.